Testing. Okay, I think we're live. Welcome back, guys, to another Fish the Moment live stream. I took last week off. I was actually doing some stuff for the MBA program, but I'm back after it this week, and I have 4 more subscriber lakes I'm going to break down using Google Earth and Navionics. So I'm excited to be back. I already see a couple guys already in the chat, so that's awesome. And basically, today I'm going to be looking at a lot of lakes that are in the mid-Atlantic region of the country, and most of them are going to be clear lakes, but I'm also going to be looking at the Potomac River, which is a completely different fishery from the other 3 lakes I'll be looking at. Potomac River is a really dirty river system. It has a lot of grass in it, and it's a tidal fishery. So it's going to be a really good show tonight. So I'm just going to wait for a few more people to join in, and then we're going to get right into it. So already got some people commenting over here. Bucketmouth Bass, good to see you as always. Rod Royal, good to see you again. Ryan R, always here, so great to see you. I'm doing well, Ryan. So chat's already taken off. We're only up to 5 people right now, so I'm gonna wait for the stream to get up to about 25, 30 people, and then I'm gonna start reading off the lakes and getting into it. Karen, good to see you. Gabe Williams, good to see you, and Bus Conversion Life, what's up? I don't know if I've ever seen you in the chat before. I may have seen a comment on one of my YouTube videos, so good to see you here. Okay. Thanks, Hank. Thanks for welcoming me back. I'm just going to get a few things set up over here on my chat, and then we got about 25 people already in, which is awesome, and so right away, we're getting right back to it, and so let me pull a couple things up here on my chat screen, and then we're going to start the video. Okay, awesome. So I'm ready to go. So today, guys, we're going to be looking at 4 lakes. The first is going to be Lake Murray in South Carolina, and then I'm going to be looking at the Potomac River, which is in Maryland or Washington, D.C. area. Next up, we'll be looking at Lake Tuscaloosa in Alabama, and then finally Smith Mountain Lake in Virginia. And all of these lakes, with the exception of Lake Tuscaloosa, have hosted Elite Series events, FLW Tour events, and FLW Forcewood Cups. So all great tournament fishing lakes. So it should be pretty fun to break it down. Let's see here. Got a bunch of people commenting still. Ryan. Hope Arkansas is taking care of my boy. Arkansas has been pretty tough right now as far as fishing is concerned. I haven't been able to get on the lake in the last couple weeks just because it's been freezing, like in the 30s almost every day. And so water temperatures are really cold and the fishing has just been terrible. So it looks like it's going to start warming up here in the next couple weeks, and I should be able to be putting more content out, fishing content that is. I also have a video that I'm editing right now, and I'll put that up on the channel by this weekend, and it's all about pattern fishing. And the whole purpose of this video, it's like a 25-minute video, but it's going to show you how to use the Navionics and the Google Earth maps and actually take what I'm showing you guys in this live stream to the lake and actually catch fish using what I'm showing you tonight. So hopefully you'll enjoy that video. Let's see here. Cali Bass Kid, what's up, man? Bus Conversion Life says he's a new subscriber. Welcome to community. Feel free, guys, to chat in the live chat here. Ask questions. Ask me questions. Ask each other questions. I love when people are talking in the chat. It really makes these streams a lot better. And as always, if you want to suggest lakes for me to show on this live stream, there's some information in the bottom right corner here. Just send me an email at fishthemoment1@gmail.com and tell me the lake name, the state, the county, water clarity, the water temp, and make sure it has a Navionics lake map. And to find out if the lake has a Navionics lake map, you can actually go to webapp.navionics.com, and it's a free topographic map service that Navionics offers online, and I put the address to that website right below Fish the Moment there on the screen, so you can find that. And so there's a bunch of comments rolling in here from everyone. Clifford, good to see you. Bass Account, good to see you. And Ian Nation, good to see you guys. And so Ian is actually asking, do I fish BFLs? I used to fish BFLs as a co-angler, and I think I finished in like top 5 in points one year doing that, but I haven't fished as a boater. I just don't fish enough right now to put 200, 300 bucks down for a tournament, or 500 bucks, whatever they are. So, anyways, let's get into it, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through Google Earth on these lakes, and then go to the chat, read through all your comments, answer questions, and then I'll do Navionics, and I'll switch to the next lake. And that's how we've been doing it over the last few streams, and it seemed to work out pretty well, and I'm going to keep up with that pattern. So first up, let's start looking at Lake Murray. Okay, so Lake Murray is a lake in South Carolina, and last year it was the host of the FLW Forest Wood Cup, and they crushed them this summer out there throwing big walking baits and like fluke rigs, and they were chasing schooling blueback herring, and they were catching 4 and 5 pound bass on topwaters all throughout the day, just on big topwaters, and it was really fun to watch. If you haven't seen the Forest Wood Cup from last year, you can check it out on YouTube. Don't watch it during the stream, just after the stream, go check it out so you don't miss any good content here. But FLW posts all of their full-length tour event shows on YouTube. So you can just type in Lake Murray, South Carolina Forest Wood Cup, and you can pull up those shows, and they're really good to watch. The lake right now is 7 feet low, and so I had a bunch of people sending me emails about this lake, actually wanting me to look at it because they said the fishing is really tough because the lake is so low. And a lot of the lakes in Arkansas are low this year too, like 7 to 10 feet low, and so a lot of times I can mess up the fishing, but at the same time I think it also concentrates the fish. So I have a few suggestions for you guys on Lake Murray to maybe try to find some fish and catch some good ones. And then, like I already said, the blueback herring is a huge pattern out on Lake Murray. These fish just focus on chasing these big blueback herring. It's kind of like a steak for these fish. They want to get as many blueback herring as they can, and they'll basically starve themselves trying to chase these blueback herring and pass up other forage like bluegill, regular shad, and crawfish. As far as the temperature goes for Lake Murray, the temps in the area are between 65 and 70 degrees over the next 3 weeks, and so the fish should start moving up to their pre-spawn locations any minute now if they're not there already, and the spawn should be happening pretty soon here in South Carolina. So I'm going to show you guys some spots on Google Earth here first, and then we'll switch over to Navionics after I answer some questions. Okay, so Lake Murray's 7 feet low. So what I actually did to figure out what the lake looks like when the lake is low is I actually went over here to the top of my Google Earth screen, and I clicked on this compass, or a little clock, and it's a clock with an arrow pointing to the left, and it says show historical imagery, use a time slider to move between acquisition dates. And basically what this slider here lets you do is pick different images that Google Earth has captured over the years. And so I picked a time in 2004 when the lake was actually really down. Looks like it's probably 6 or 7 feet down like it is now. So using that now, I'm just going to try to pick out some spots for these guys on this lake, because this lake is super low, and when lakes are low, you're going to not have as much cover in the water, and when you get into the pre-spawn and the spawn, a lot of times these fish want to get on hard cover like docks, laydowns, rocks, things like that. With the lake being so low, it's hard to find that good hard cover. And so basically what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to pick one creek out of Lake Murray. Lake Murray is a pretty big reservoir, and so I'm just going to pick this creek in the center of the lake here to break down. The reason I like it is because it has a good mix of clear water out here in the bottom of the lake. You can see the lake is pretty blue and kind of this darker color here. That means that there's clear water. And then if you go back in these creeks, you can see that there's a little bit dirtier water, and you can see that water is kind of brown or a little bit muddy. And so the reason I like to have that mix of clean and dirty water is because depending on the weather conditions, the fish are going to like to be in clear or muddy water. When you get a big cold front, the fish aren't going to want to sit in clear water. Or when you get, when you get a cold front, the fish aren't going to want to sit in muddy water. The worst thing you can fish is cooling, muddy water. And so what I like to do when you get a big cold front that comes through, the water temperature starts to cool down, is fish in clear water. And then when the water temperatures start to warm up, you get some sunny days, some warming trends, I like to get into this dirtier water. And so with all the warming trends happening here in South Carolina, I'm going to focus on that area where the clear water and the dirty water mix. And so if we look at these creeks here, here's a good candidate for that. You can see clean water here, dirty water in the back of this creek. So the mouth of this creek is going to be a really good choice. Right around in here, these points are a really good choice. Again, muddy water in the back of the creeks, clean water out in the mouth. So this little area here. And then this whole section of this creek right here actually kind of is a mix of this dirty water in the back of the creek and the clear water out here in the middle. And when the fish are going up to spawn, they don't like to get in like really muddy water, especially on these clear water lakes, because the sun doesn't penetrate through the water as much, and it's just not as good for the fish's eggs. And so they're going to want to stay in this like kind of mid-range water clarity, anywhere from 1 foot to 3 foot visibility. And so when I'm trying to find pre-spawn fish in these types of areas, the first thing I'm going to do is look for hard cover near spawning areas. And a spawning area is anywhere where you have basically a shallow pocket, a flat area like these pockets right here. These are all spawning areas. It's real shallow water and really flat. And so all of this area is spawning pockets and spawning flats. And so what I want to do is find areas with hard cover close to these shallow pockets. And so, like, let's take this creek here as an example. We have a nice shallow spawning pocket here, and we have some nice docks that are leading into some of these pockets. Here's a dock right here. Here's another dock. We got 2 more docks in the mouth of this spawning bay, so kind of out here towards the main lake. And there's actually a few docks back in the spawning pocket. And with the water temperatures warming up, especially on lakes in South Carolina, these fish are going to go straight to these boat docks on sunny days. And so I'm going to be fishing these boat docks with jigs, like a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce flipping jig. I might fish a jerk bait down the side of them if they're in 10 to 15 feet of water. And I'll also throw an Alabama rig up shallow. Even if the docks are in 3 or 4 feet of water, I'll still throw the Alabama rig up shallow against these docks. So this little area right in here is going to be a great spot, I think, on Lake Murray, because you have, again, access to a little bit deeper water out here in clear water, but again, these fish can get on these spawning flats pretty quickly. Another spot I really like out here on Lake Murray right now is these couple islands that are kind of out here in the middle of the lake. With this lake drawn down, a lot of these fish from the fall are actually going to pull off the bank, and they're going to kind of stay out a little bit deeper. When I'm fishing Lake Washita over the Christmas break, actually, I found that normally the fish on Lake Washita get pretty shallow. They'll get up in 10 to 15 feet of water, and they'll stay there throughout the winter because there's a lot of good grass in Lake Washita. But right now the lake is 10 feet low, and because of that, a lot of the fish aren't actually pulling up in the grass as much as they normally do, and they're actually sitting a little bit deeper in 25 to 30 feet of water, staging to move up into these spawning pockets. And so let's say that the water temps at Lake Murray are still between, let's say, 55 degree range. A lot of those fish are still going to actually be sitting in that 20 to 25 feet of water chasing those blueback herring. And so what I would do is I would actually come out to some of these islands out here, and we'll check them out on Navionics, but I would come out here and fish like a 1/2 ounce football jig or a mop style jig like the one that Jordan Lee used at the Classic at Lake Conroe. I would maybe throw a deep diving jerk bait or an Alabama rig. And so those are kind of some of the areas I would look at just using Google Earth. So now I'm going to get over to the questions over here real quick, and then I'm going to take a look at this lake on Navionics, because I think we can break it down a little bit better on Navionics as opposed to just looking at it with Google Earth. Okay, let's see here. We're getting a ton of comments here. BA Fishing, he's saying, how's it going? Hope everyone is having a great evening. Good to see you on the stream. Let's see here. Clifford said went to Alabama for a week and didn't get to fish. Hope all is well with your mom there, Clifford. But hopefully you might be able to get back out to Alabama. We're going to look at Lake Tuscaloosa, and it looks like a pretty good lake. So if you're still in the area or going back down, maybe you can sneak back out on that lake here. Let's see here. What's the name of the creek? Flippin' for fishing lips, not tips. I have no idea what this creek is called. I'll look at it here in a second on Navionics. But here's Counts Island, if that helps at all. It's a creek just on the north end of the lake and like in the north center of the lake. I don't know the creek name specifically. Let's see here. Todd Lee is asking, in your opinion, how far will bass move within its lifetime? So there's been some interesting studies on bass like movement and bass migration, and they actually did some studies on some fish on Lake Dardanelle here in Arkansas. And what they found is that a lot of times fish will move huge amount of distances, especially when the lakes flood and kind of contract. And they mark some of these fish just for studies, and they found that a lot of times when these fish are spawning or they're kind of setting up in one part of the lake, they'll actually want to stay in that area of the lake. And even if they're caught, let's say 20 miles up the lake in like a big spawning flat and brought back down to weigh-in and then released by the boat ramp, sometimes these fish will swim 20 miles to get back to that spawning area. Other times, though, you might see that fish are sitting in a spawning area for the spring, and then they'll move 10 or 15 miles down out of that creek to some main lake ledges. So fish move around a lot, but in general, I feel like a lot of fish kind of stay where they're born and stay in the area where they were born if they're not messed up by tournament anglers moving them and things like that. So that's just what I've seen. That might not be true in all cases, but I just have seen a lot of like research on that stuff and some stuff they've done with Bassmaster. Clifford said, "I'm ready for Johnny to come to Texas and take me fishing. See if I can outfish him." Pretty high possibility there, Clifford. I have a pretty good track record with people in the back of my boat. I've had so many people catch their PB out of the back of my boat. It's crazy. Like I've had so many 6 and 7 pounders caught by co-anglers in the back of my boat. I don't know what the deal is, but if we go fishing, definitely take the seat in the back because you're gonna outcatch me almost guaranteed. Ryan says you'll be tagging along too. Let's see here. Mike Anderson is saying it would be nice to see you fish some lakes reviewed as an extension to the review. Thanks for all the hard work. Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks so much for supporting the channel and coming to these live streams, guys. And I'm definitely going to want to come out and actually go to some of these lakes that I'm reviewing and try to see if I can catch fish on the spots I'm showing you. And I'm going to try to do that this summer, hopefully. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it in the near future, but definitely this summer. Tyler on the Gas from NBA program is here with us. Justin Rogers just joined. Good to see you. From Edge to the Ledge, good to see you. And let's see here. Okay, so I got through all the comments, so that's awesome. So now I'm going to switch over from the Navionics here, or switch over from Google Earth over to the Navionics and take a look at that. Okay, so now we have Navionics pulled up, and so we're just going to go back down to this creek we were looking at, and using Navionics, we're going to get a lot better idea of what's actually going on in this creek. Lake Murray is a pretty deep and clear reservoir, and so when you're looking at these lakes on Google Earth, you're not going to get the full picture just because the lakes are so deep and a lot of these fish are going to be sitting offshore. So I'm actually going to switch this from the Navionics sonar chart. This is the really detailed map right here. This gives you like 1 foot contour lines, and if you click on this little transducer icon, I'm going to switch it to Navionics. Which gives you a little less detail, but it's a little bit easier to see on the stream. So I'm just going to do that. But I'm just going to show you some of the spots that we just looked at on Google Earth and show you why I like them, and then maybe show you guys some offshore spots as well. So here's that spot that I was just looking at with you guys with all those boat docks. And here's the area I was saying that had a bunch of spawning flats and had some dirty water in the back of this creek. And the reason I like this area so much is that if you look right here, there's a really nice creek channel that runs into this creek. It's a nice defined creek channel. And you can see it here by that stretch of white water here. You can also read right here that it has a creek channel, and you can also see these dotted lines. So there's a nice creek channel that feeds the back of this creek. And right on the mouth of these spawning pockets, there's some areas where the creek channel swings right up against the banks here, right up against these docks. And in the springtime, especially in the pre-spawn, some of the best spots you can fish are areas where the creek channel runs up against the shoreline. And these are great places to throw like a suspending jerkbait or an Alabama rig or even fishing a jig. off the docks. And so just to show you some areas, one right here, you can see that there's a nice little creek channel that swings right up against this point and then kind of turns back out. So it swings around here and turns back out. And this water right here, as you can see, is a little bit deeper. If you look at these contour lines, they're really tight together, and that means that there's a sharp drop right by these docks. And there's actually a little bit of a flat spot right here, which looks really nice. That could be a good spot to fish a jerkbait or a jig. There might be some rock there. If you guys remember from other streams, whenever you find an area where the contour lines are really spread out and then there's just like blank space in the contour lines, that's going to indicate hard bottom. And in the springtime, that hard bottom is going to mean that there's rock down there, and rock holds heat a lot better than like mud and sand bottoms, and so that water around those rocks is going to heat up faster, and it's going to draw these fish, these pre-spawn bass. So that's a good little subtle spot to check out. And then all these docks, I mean, when you're fishing in the springtime, especially when you get up towards the spawn, fish love to get under boat docks when it's sunny. The boat docks offer shade, they offer cover. Bait fish will get around these boat docks a lot. And again, right here, the contour lines are really sharp against these boat docks, and then they start to spread out in here, meaning that this water in here is shallower, and this water right here is deeper. The same exact thing is happening right here, guys. So again, contour lines are sharp together right up against this dock, and then they start to spread out around the corner into this pocket. And so I think that these docks right in here and right in here are going to be a little bit deeper, and they're going to be really good for fishing the pre-spawn. And I would fish them, again, with the Alabama rig, jerkbait, jig, stuff like that. And so, also, if you get a really warm day, don't be afraid to move back into these creeks a little bit. When the water's cold, these fish like to be on these steeper docks, the ones that are near deep water. But when the water temperature starts to warm up, especially into like noon or, I don't know, maybe like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the fish like to pull up into these pockets, and they'll get underneath these shallow boat docks way in the back of these creeks. I'm talking like they might move all the way back into this part of the creek, even into the dirtier water, and you can catch them skipping a jig underneath boat docks. You can catch them throwing a little square bill, things like that. So don't discount that too if the water temperatures are warming up. So that's just an example of one little creek, and you can probably take that advice there and duplicate that around Lake Murray. There's a ton of spots that look just like that. So hopefully that all made sense with how to read the contour lines and stuff. But since we're using Navionics, I want to show you guys some offshore spots that look good to me as well, because I think that that's where you're going to have the best shot of catching a big bag on Lake Murray, especially in like the next 2 or 3 weeks before those fish move up on the beds. So let's see here. I got some donations I want to read out real quick. First, Classic Top 40 Radio, thank you for the $10. And From the Edge to the Ledge, thank you for the $10. Appreciate that, as always, guys, the donations. And if you guys want to donate, you just hit the Super Chat icon at the bottom of your screen here. It only works, I think, on computers. It might work on phones, but I'm not sure. I've heard some people having issues with that. But again, thanks for the donations, guys. Really appreciate that. So anyways, a couple spots offshore here on Lake Murray that I really liked. The first was this area right here that I was talking about, which were those humps. And you could see those on Google Earth when the lake were down, but there's some nice humps out here. And the reason I like these humps is because they actually extend off of a long ridge. And this is a type of spot actually that these guys were fishing during the Forest Wood Cup in the summer when they were chasing blueback herring. The fish will pull up on these ridges and these humps and feed on shad. And in this pre-spawn, they'll get in the exact same type of areas and chase these blueback herring on certain times of the day. And they might not be there all day. They might only pull up for an hour or so. But all that will happen is that they'll just have a big school of blueback herring that gets blown up on these ridges from the wind or from the current. And when that happens, there's going to be big schools of bass that are sitting off the end of these ridges, and they'll just move up on top and start feeding on those blueback herring. And so what I would do if I was fishing these ridges is I would just take a deep diving jerkbait that dives maybe 8 to 10 feet and work it pretty quick, backs the boat, or I would fish a Alabama rig, and I would just fish it pretty quick around these humps in about 10 foot of water. Another spot that I thought looked really good here is actually this saddle right here. If you look here, we have an area where we have a creek channel running on this side and a creek channel that runs on this side, and there's kind of a hump that's formed in the middle of this pocket or the middle of this creek, like dead in the center. And the reason I like it so much is actually because it has some deep water right in the center here, but there's shallow water on both sides. And what'll happen in the springtime and in the late winter is the shad will start migrating back into these pockets to spawn. And a lot of these blueback herring will spawn when the water temp is 50 to 55 degrees, and they'll move back into these creeks trying to get to some shallower water to spawn. And these 2 points of this hump and this point kind of serve as like a funnel. So if you think about it, the wind's going to push through there and there's going to be stronger current, and it's like a funnel funneling all those blueback herring through this little area. And you can catch fish really well on the corner of these points and this hump, so like right in here and right in here, and you can catch them on 3/4 ounce football head jig and the Alabama rig. And a lot of times you're going to have to fish 15 or 20 of these spots throughout the day to find a good looking spot or a spot that has fish. But normally if you find fish on a pattern like this, you're going to crush them. You're going to catch 25 pounds, something like that. So I'll show you a couple more spots like that real quick too. Here's another one that I found. It's a nice subtle little point that sticks out here. If you look, again, here's a nice little creek channel that runs in, and there's a creek that runs on this side. And again, this is a little funnel area. You can see that there's a bend in that creek, and whenever you get a turn in the creek channel, that's also going to make the current run a little bit faster. And so the inside of this point could be really good because that current's whipping around the corner, and those fish will set up right on this little point, and you can catch them again on that Alabama rig and on that football jig. And with the lake being like 7 to 8 feet low, I would think that you want to try to find spots where the bottom of the lake is in 20 to 25 feet of water. So even though right here, like the contour lines say 25 feet, if the lake's 7 feet down, that means the water is going to be 18 foot there. So I'd actually try to fish in these areas where the contour lines read maybe 30 to 35 feet, because that means the actual water depth is going to be 25 to 30 feet on the lake. So those are just a couple spots I found. There's a lot more. There's like one right here. There's a nice point right here that looked good, and just on and on and on. There's tons of offshore spots out here, and you can probably just look around in these maps for hours and pull up good offshore spots. Here's another one. But I would just go with my graph, and I would graph over these points and these little drains and ditches, all this stuff, and I would just look for shad on the graph. I would look for areas that have blueback herring on them, that have clouds of bait in the area. And if there's bait in the area, that means there's going to be fish there, almost guaranteed, especially here on Lake Murray. So just be graphing around looking for bait offshore, and you're going to run in some big bass. The last thing I want to talk about was actually moving back in these creeks a little bit when we get up to the spawn. And again, the water temperatures or the air temperatures are getting up to the 70-degree mark in the next week in South Carolina, and so these fish are going to want to start moving up to spawn. And when they do that, normally what they're going to do is they're going to stage on some of the steeper banks back in these creeks. And using Google Earth, we couldn't really tell which banks were steep banks and which ones weren't. And so we're going to use Navionics here to kind of call that out. And first one I kind of found here that looked really interesting was right in here. If you look at this bank, there's a nice creek channel that runs into this creek basically, and it runs right up against this point here. And so it runs in here and then kind of swings off. And if you look right here, the contour lines are really sharp and close together, which means that there's a steep drop, and then it feeds into some shallower water here. And this bank right here looks like an amazing, this little point right here looks like an amazing spot to throw a square bill crankbait, maybe a flat side crankbait like KBU 1.5 flat. You know, I'm always talking about this bait I love. Maybe throw a jerk bait or like an Alabama rig even. And so that's a really good looking pre-spawn bank. And let's see here. Another spot that looks really good is right here. Again, that creek runs up against this bank, and you can see right here there's some steeper water, some deeper water where those contour lines are close together, and then it kind of spreads out back into this bay. And these docks right here and even these shallower docks are going to be money when the fish start moving up to spawn. So oh, awesome. I just got another donation here from Justin Rogers, my man. $50. Thank you so much, Justin. Really appreciate that. Justin's buddy actually saw him at Bass Pro Shops just randomly one day when I was in Little Rock. So Justin's an awesome guy. And he's also called dibs on me for fishing any tournaments when I get out of college in Arkansas. So if there's any Arkansas guys, apologize. Justin's already got me pinned down. But if you want me to fish Texas tournaments, South Carolina, any other state, I'm available. So if you guys want to call dibs right now in the comments, I will try to honor that, hopefully. If I can remember them all, don't flub me with them, or maybe send me an email, and I'll make sure to remember who called me out for their partner. Um, I'll get back to these comments here in a second, too, guys. I know you guys are just flooding this with comments, and so I just want to talk about a couple more things here on Navionics, and then we'll get over to that. So the last thing I wanted to look at here, guys, I'm actually going to go back to Google Earth, and I want to show you a pattern that might develop in the next couple of weeks on Lake Murray, especially if they get a lot of rain there. Whenever you get a lot of rain in the pre-spawn, what's going to happen is the water or the lake is going to rise really quickly, and these fish are going to pull off of these deeper areas up into the shallow water. And a couple of years ago, when they had an FLW tournament, I don't know if it was on Lake Murray, it was one of these South Carolina lakes. Basically, one of the guys ended up catching him on a rattle trap or like a striking red-eye shad, a lipless crankbait kind of bait up in some shallow grass. And I know that Lake Murray used to have some grass in it and some shallow water grass. And so I want to just show you one area that I think would look really good for that type of pattern. And normally these type of lakes or these type of areas are way up these creeks. So if you look on Lake Murray here, this is the deep, clear end of the lake. But a lot of times you can find some really good areas way back up in these creeks. And one of those areas is actually right up in here. And I was looking at this part of the lake earlier, and if you actually take it back, I think to 2005 maybe, you can see that there's a ton of there we go. There's a ton of vegetation that used to be back in here. You can see there's some like matted grass and stuff. And if there's grass still in Lake Murray with the lake falling, I'm sure that all the grass has died out, which is kind of a bummer. But if there's any grass in your lake on the upper end like this, this can be a dynamite way to catch fish when the water's warming and the fish are pulling up in these spawning bays. Just throw like a bladed swim jig like the Striking Pure Poison here, or maybe like a lipless crankbait, like the red-eye shad. Throw that on the edges of this grass, and these fish will stage on this grass because there's a lot of oxygen. There's shad that get pushed up in there. And it's a great spot. Another thing you can do is if there's not any grass in these areas, you can actually look for areas that have laydowns and stuff on them. And so if you look in this bank right here, there's some really nice laydown logs and some just sticks and things like that. And on the upper end of these clear lakes, a lot of times some 4 and 5 and 6 pound bass will pull up on these shallow laydowns and stage in the spawn in like late February, early March, especially when the water temps gets like 55 degrees. And what I would do is throw like a 1/2 ounce black and blue jig and fish them all the way out to the tips of these laydowns. And you can catch some really big bags doing that, especially if it's like a 1-day tournament. Normally, if you're fishing a 4-day tournament, these type of areas dry up pretty quick because they get a lot of pressure. But if you're fishing just like a 1-day jackpot tournament, I would definitely check out the upper end of some of these lakes when the water's warming. So anyways, let me get back to these comments real quick, and then we're going to switch to the next lake. So let's see here. Got Tyler thanking me for the shout out. Let's see here. Flippin' for Fishing Lips, he says, have you ever looked at Clarks Hill or Storm Thurmond in South Carolina, Georgia? I have not looked at either of those yet, but I think I'm going to probably do one on Clarks Hill pretty soon. I'm getting a lot of requests for that. Hank Lawson says, let me know if you ever plan to fish Lay Lake in Alabama. I'll hook you up with a place to stay. Appreciate that. That's definitely on my bucket list, is to fish Lay Lake. That lake is amazing. I know it's really good in the springtime. I think they had some classics out there, if I'm not mistaken, and KVD, I think, won in there. So there's some really good fishing on Lay Lake. I want to get out there for sure. Rod Royal says, tournaments during spawn pull the best breeding stock off their beds. Yeah, so basically saying that sometimes in tournaments it sometimes messes up the fish when they're spawning, and I definitely agree. And a lot of times, what I try to do is if I'm fishing a tournament or things like that, and I know I'm going to be catching fish off the beds, I sometimes even ask the tournament directors if I can take the fish back over to their spawning areas, especially if it's like a 5 or 6 pounder. And a lot of times they'll let me do that, especially if it's not a huge tournament, instead of just dumping them at the boat ramp. And if I know there's people fishing in my area too, I'll ask them if they want to throw their fish in my live well, and I'll take them all back over there. So I like to do that. It's just a little extra thing I do, but I think it's really important to keep the fish spawning, keep these lakes getting restocked with new fry every year, and messing them up with sight fishing and things like that. I don't know how much it messes them up, but I try to minimize the damage as much as I can. Clifford says, if I could throw a box of 3 Excalibur Owl traps that far, I would donate a box. I would donate a box of them to you. I appreciate that. One thing I'm thinking about doing, I might set up like a PO box or something like that. I know a lot of the YouTube channels have like mail time and things like that. I don't know if I want to deal with all that. It seems like a lot to manage, and I don't really know how I feel about y'all sending me fishing tackle. I got a ton of tackle, but I know you guys have a lot of baits you want me to try, and I could maybe even do like a subscriber fishing lure challenge or something like that. I'm not a big fan of like the challenge videos, but I feel like that would still be something to be kind of cool. Let's see here. Have you ever been to Squaw Creek in Glen Rose? I have not. I've heard of it though. I've watched some Honey Hole All Outdoors. I don't know if you guys have watched that show on TV. I watched some of those on YouTube, and Squaw Creek looks really good, but I've never been there myself. Let's see here. In water that is staying 3-foot visibility maximum, will the bass be that deep, 20 to 30 feet? That's Bruce is asking. For sure. If the water temperature is 3 feet visibility, those fish will definitely be in 20, 25 feet of water. That happens all the time on lakes like Sam Rayburn Lake in Texas. Normally, though, when the water temperature gets, or the water clarity gets below like 2 feet of water, or 2 feet of visibility, I would say that the maximum depth I'm going to be fishing is like 15 to 20 feet. I won't go any deeper than that if the water clarity is 2 feet or less. And then if the water clarity is like a foot or less on the majority of the lake, then I'm not going to go deeper than about 10 feet of water. So that's kind of my guidelines. And then after you get clearer than 3 feet of water, fish will get in any water depth from 30 feet to 100 feet. Let's see here. From the edge to the ledge says, I love the KVD 1.5 flat crankbaits, for sure. That's one of my favorite baits. I think you say you got one of those for Christmas, so that bait is awesome. Check that out if you haven't thrown it before. Let's see here. From the edge to the ledge says maybe we can fish together if you come to South Carolina, North Carolina. Definitely want to come to South Carolina, North Carolina. That seems like where a lot of you guys are from, and so I'd love to make kind of like a tour of like Lake Murray, maybe Clark's Hill. There's a couple other lakes I've looked at so far, like Lake Monticello, places like that. I love to kind of go out, especially maybe during like the April time when the fish get on the points and start chasing blueback herring, and you can get up like on the points and run from point to point and just crush them on top wires. That sounds like an awesome time. So I'm going to keep that in mind for the future for sure. Let's see here. Getting our stuff. Bass and Newbie says, your videos are so informative. Thanks for the schooling. Glad to help out. I'm trying to make these videos, I guess, kind of like approachable for the new anglers and the experienced anglers. So let me know in the chat if you think I'm doing a good job, if I'm getting too technical, if I need to explain stuff more clearly, or if I'm boring you and you want me to get more in depth, because I can. Surprisingly, I could probably get even more nerdy about this stuff, but I think right now I found a pretty good balance. But let me know what you think in the chat here. And then Pat, he says, appreciate you, Johnny, the $10 donation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And thanks again for all the support, as always. So I think I got through all the comments here. So now I'm going to switch over to the next lake, and that's going to be the Potomac River. So that's actually not a lake. It's a river. But anyways. Okay, so the Potomac River. The Potomac River was a pretty highly requested body of water, and it runs right through Washington, D.C., and it's a great fishery. It's one of those, legendary fisheries that the Bassmaster Elite Series and the FLW Tour has fished for years. And the thing about fishing river systems this time of year in the spring and in the late winter is that first off, the fish can be really tough to catch if the water temperatures are still cold. So if the water temperatures are between 35 and 50 degrees on these river systems, the fishing can be really tough. And a lot of times, the other problem you get with these river systems is that when the water does start warming up to that 50 to 60 degree range, the fish are all going to congregate in a few small areas, and you get a ton of boat traffic where you're going to have 10 or 15 boats in the same little area. And so what I wanted to do today was kind of show you some of the areas I like on the Potomac River and maybe give you guys some ideas of how to find lakes on these river systems where a lot of times all the spots look the same, but for some reason the fish just set up on one little area or one specific spot year after year. So the first thing I did actually to find some spots out here on the Potomac River was to actually go back and look at some old Bassmaster and FLW TV shows on YouTube. Again, I just mentioned that earlier. You can actually go onto YouTube and just type in Potomac River bass fishing, and you'll find all these old Bassmaster and FLW shows they've uploaded. And they normally show areas of the lake that these pros are fishing, at least a few. And so what I did is I kind of made a compilation of a few different shows worth of spots, and I kind of marked them on the map here. And the spots these guys are fishing are actually summertime spots, not spring spots. But what I found on river systems is that fish will sit in the same area of the lake from the spring all the way through the summer. And normally they'll kind of spawn in one area in the spring and then just move maybe 10 or 15 yards to a little bit deeper water in the summer, but stay close to their spawning areas. And so what I want to do is just show you guys some areas that are kind of close together that I think would be good spawning locations, especially when the water temperatures get up in like the 50 degree range. Looks like here in DC, the air temperature is between 45 and 55 degrees, so the water temperature is still going to be pretty cold, but when it does start to warm up, hopefully the guys who are fishing out here have some areas they can check out. So first spot I wanted to look at was a spot that I found David Dudley fishing in one of the FLW tour events back there in 2007. And this is actually called Mattawoman Creek. And apparently this is a really big community hole. It looks amazing. You can see here's the main river, and back in here there's nice clean backwater. The one big thing about fishing river systems anytime or any river system across the country is that in the spring and in the winter, these fish are going to want to get into clear water, and they're going to want to get into backwater areas. They're not going to want to sit in dirty water or out on the main river. So I'm kind of skipping around here to try to find some better images, but they're not going to want to sit out here on the main river channel. They're actually going to pull back into these backwaters, and the reason they like to do that is because one, there's going to be warmer water back in the backwaters because it's protected from the main river current. Second is there's going to be more vegetation in the backwaters normally. I know there's some good main river grass on the Potomac, but normally you'll find the most vegetation in the backwaters, and again, the vegetation holds heat and it'll hold oxygen, and fish love to spawn around it because normally there's hard bottom around grass and lily pads. And then last but not least, normally these backwater areas are going to be protected from the wind. So not just the current, but also the wind. So if you get a strong north wind, a lot of times that can blow out a whole area of a lake and can really mess up fish during the spawn. But if you get in some of these creeks, that wind doesn't affect it as much. And so one big call out on the Potomac River, though, is that it's actually a tidal water fishery, which means that because of the ocean tides, the water is going to fluctuate 2 or 3 feet throughout the day. So there's going to be an area of high tide where the water is 2 or 3 feet higher than it is during the low tide. And that's going to really change up the fishing, and then you really have to figure out your timing when you're fishing these tidal fisheries. So, for example, let's say we're looking at Dudley spot right here, where if you look at it, it looks like this lake is on high tide right now. So the water is pretty high. You don't really see any vegetation or anything above the water. But then if we take it back to Another time, you can actually see that now we're on low tide, and you can see some of this vegetation sticking out of the water here and here, and these creeks are almost dry. And that's not because the lake was low, it just means that every single time throughout the day, or every single day, I mean, the lake is going to get drawn down to this really low level on low tide, and then it's going to get filled back up like this to full pool on high tide. So normally when I'm looking for areas to fish on these tidal river waters, I like to look at the low tide on Google Earth and try to find areas where there's deep water close to some shallow vegetation or shallow cover. And normally what will happen is the fish during high tide will be up in the shallow grass. They'll be up on these flats, like they'll be sitting up here. And if you think about it, the water is going to be up. And they're going to be all in these flats right here, trying to spawn, things like that. But then when the tide comes out, they're actually going to want to pull back into this little bit deeper water. And a lot of times the fish will kind of spawn out here a little bit deeper too, just because all this is going to be high and dry at half the day. And so they'll spawn out here on these flats a little bit deeper, and you can kind of catch them in maybe 2 to 5 feet of water normally during the spawn. And so again, David Dudley was fishing in here. This whole creek looks really amazing. If you look right here, there's a nice creek channel that swings around this island. I would think that these fish are going to try to spawn around the edge of this island here. They might be spawning even back in this creek, like right here. See this little ditch that cuts into this flat? That's just beautiful right there. And these fish are going to try to spawn right along the edge of this ditch, just laying their eggs all on the edge of this ditch. And if we take the lake back up to full tide, let me find, or a full pool, find a good image. You can see, normally you wouldn't be able to see anything. It just looks like a big flat area of nothing. But when we go down to low tide, boom, you have that nice ditch. And so these fish are going to want to spawn right on the edge of this ditch, or even kind of almost in the ditch. And great lures to fish these areas with are lipless crankbaits. And number one bait really out there recently has been a bladed jig, or like the Striking Pure Poison. Another thing that guys have been catching them on are like swimming jigs, or flukes like a Striking Caffeine Shad, baits like that, just fishing them slow down these ditches. And so this is a really good looking area. I like it a lot. And I also like it because I know that there's fish in this area because David Dudley caught fish in here. And a lot of other guys did as well throughout the FLW Tour event. And so I know there's resident fish that live in this creek. So this would be one of my number one stops if I came to the Potomac River. Here's another spot right here. This is an area that Keith Combs was fishing when the Elite Series came here, again in the summertime. And basically all it is you have a nice big grass flat. And these fish were pulling up into this grass in the summertime, and he was catching them on the outside edge with a Striking Red Eye Shad and a Striking Pure Poison. But in the spring, these fish will actually come up into this flat in here, and they'll lay their eggs and spawn up in this grassy flat. And you can catch them flipping, you can catch them fishing a swim jig, fishing a stick bait, like a Striking Ocho or a Senko, stuff like that. All up through these grass beds. And so you can even catch them up around some of these boat docks. So this is another really good area for the spawn. Normally what I would do if I came here is I would fish right around here on the outside edge with a Pure Poison first, and just try to see if there's any fish sitting off the outside edge of this grass. Then I would move my way back up onto the flat, fishing still a moving bait, maybe just throwing this Pure Poison and reeling it quicker, maybe throwing like a quarter ounce swim jig, fishing it pretty quick through the grass, and I would just fish until I got bit. And normally on these grassy lakes or these grassy river systems, the fish are going to be congregated in one little tiny area. So maybe if you look right here, there's a nice little ditch that runs into this grass flat. And so these fish might all be congregated in this 10-yard area, and you might not get another bite along this whole stretch, just in that one little spot. So just look out for that when you're fishing these river systems, because that can be a big deal. Another area that was really popular actually was this area right here. As you can see, it's just off the main river system, and actually this is where Tom Monsoor won the FLW Tour event last year on Potomac River. And as you can see, again, there's some nice ditches in here, there's some grassy flats, and he was just kind of fishing all throughout this flat, kind of targeting these ditches with a swim jig. It's his like go-to thing. He's from Wisconsin, just like me, and he just loves to throw that swim jig nice and slow through the grass. He'll cast it out, let it sink to the bottom, and just crawl it through the grass, kind of fishing it almost like, you would fish a worm or something through the grass. But this is areas fishing, again, a big spawning flat with some deeper water ditches. The fish will move up here to spawn, and then when on low tide, they'll pull back into this ditch and kind of sit in this ditch here, waiting for the tide to come back in so they can move back up and continue doing what they were doing. So another great looking area. I'm not going to look at Navionics for this lake, or this river system, just because, I mean, you could see everything when the lake is on low tide, and I think it's just more useful in river systems to look at Google Earth than looking at Navionics, because really the best areas are going to be up shallow on river systems in 2 to 7 feet of water, or 6 inches to 7 feet of water, and especially on a tidal system, you can see all the best areas just by pulling the satellite footage back a few years when the tide's down. So another area that I'm looking at here that I really like is the back of this creek, and this is actually an area where Bill Lowen caught him really well during that Bassmaster Tour event there last year. And again, here's the main river, and it's just a creek, but if you go way back in here, you can actually find a nice little protected creek, and he was catching them actually way back in here on some isolated laydowns and stuff, and he was catching them on high tide and low tide. And this is again when the lake's on low tide, and what he would do is he would actually fish all of these isolated laydowns that you can see throughout this little creek. You can see there's a few laydowns here and here, and the fish will actually winter on these laydowns because this creek had like 7, 8, 9 feet of water in it, and they'll actually stay there all winter. And then when the water starts warming up, they'll still just kind of pull up on these laydowns, and you can catch them on a jig, catch them on a tube, Senko, stuff like that. So really good area back in here. One thing about this area is that it's pretty small, and so if you get more than 3 or 4 tournament boats in there, it's going to be pretty tough to make it last for 4 days. But Bill Lowen is an expert at these river lakes. I think he fished the Ohio River for years, and so he knows how to pick apart these little tiny creeks and make the most of them. Oh, by the way, I'm going to get back to the comments here in a second, guys. Don't worry, I'm just going to... Actually, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to get back to the comments real quick because I've been talking for a while without mentioning them. So let me get to that, and then we'll get back to talking about this. So Anthony Blinding said, "You see my question?" I did not. Let me go check for it here real quick, Anthony. Sorry if I missed it. Not seeing it in here. If you could shoot it back down at the bottom here, Anthony, I will make sure to answer it. Sorry, I missed it on the stream somehow. Flipping for Fishing Lip says, "Thanks for the info on Murray. Be glad to go out with you on either Clark's Hill or Murray. 30-minute drive from each lake. Awesome. I'll definitely keep that in mind." Anthony, okay, you posted here. So I fish a 15-acre pond. Was catching them 12 feet last week. I can't find them this week. The water temp is 52 degrees. Should I look in the shallows? So if the fish were in about 12 feet of water and the water temperature is in the 52-degree range, I would think that they're probably moved up a little bit shallower, up into maybe the 6 or 7 foot range. And so what I would do is I would probably throw a striking pure poison or like a bladed jig like this. I would also fish a flat side crankbait if there's not too much vegetation in there, and fish that kind of slow in that 5 to 7 foot range, or fish a red-eye shad or another lipless crankbait. And I would just try to fish in that 5 to 7 foot range. If there's any cover down there like a laydown or some vegetation or lily pad stems, target that stuff. That's where the fish are going to be pulling up, especially with the water temperatures warming up to 52 degrees. If you're ever in central Oklahoma, I know a small lake that produces multiple tens every year. Nick, actually, I'm really close to Oklahoma. I live right on the border when I'm going to the University of Arkansas, and so I might actually be hitting you up on that. Send me a message at fishthemoment1@gmail.com or an email, and we can try to meet up and see if I can't get out there with you here next, or maybe during the spawn even. Justin took off. Birdsong Lawn Care. What about long stretches that have multiple dikes, but everything is muddy? So if it has like a lot of like levees or jetties or dikes, things like that stick out into the middle of the lake on river systems, a lot of times in the spring, the fish normally don't get on jetties and things like that often, and so normally I like to get in the backwaters and stay off of the main river when I'm fishing river systems, just because, again, there's going to be muddier water. It's going to be a lot of current pushing through those areas. So if I was going to fish a river system in the spring or in the winter, I would stay in the backwaters just because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. Um, see here. Clifford talking about some reels and stuff. And Go Navy says, hey, the Potomac, that was my request. Did you already do it? It's fine. Watch the replay. Yeah, I've just got. I'm still working on it here. Go Navy. So hopefully you can maybe back me up here in the comments and let me know if I'm covering the Potomac well enough, showing some good spots. But anyways, let's get back to it now. One thing I want to talk to you guys about real quick actually was a new video series I'm going to be doing every week here, now that the Elite Series and the FLW is kind of picking back up. And what I'm planning on doing is actually doing a breakdown of the winning pattern from each FLW Tour event and Bass Tour event every week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find the areas that the guys were fishing, the baits, the presentation, tell you about the lake conditions, the water temperature, all that stuff, and try to show you guys what was happening during the Elite Series events and kind of do like a 2 to 5 minute wrap up of what happened that week in the winning pattern. And the goal is going to be to show you guys what patterns are working on the Elite Series and then maybe giving you some ideas on how to apply them to your home lake. And obviously I'm going to be looking at their areas using Navionics, Google Earth, all the resources I normally use in my videos. So hopefully you guys will like that, and hopefully it's a way for me to put out a little more content. My normal long form like fishing videos take so long to edit just because I try to put so much into them that hopefully these Elite Series wrap-ups will be a little bit easier to edit, and I can put out one each week. So let me know if you think that's a good idea here in the chat. So here's another good area that Jason Christie was actually fishing, and this is an area that had a bunch of flooded milfoil in it in the summertime. And as you can see, again, it's just a big grassy flat. And this is just another great area where I would just kind of fish it pretty fast with like maybe a weedless swim bait, the pure poison, things like that, and just cover water, fish through the grass here, and try to find some fish. And once you get bit on one of those baits, I would slow down, put a waypoint right where you caught that fish, and then really fish the area slowly with a soft plastic stick bait, a worm, anything like that, and just fish it slow, and you're going to find some spawning fish in there. Let's see here. Last but not least, we have a spot that Justin Lucas used to win the Bassmaster Elite Series event out here, and apparently this is a pretty big community hole, but it holds a ton of big fish, and it's just these docks here. And all he was doing was fishing a drop shot underneath these docks, and he just stayed there for 4 days and won the whole tournament. And so I don't know if this is a pattern that works in the wintertime or in the spring, but it just seemed like there's a ton of resident fish that lived around this thing. And so maybe if we're fishing on the Potomac, it might be a spot to check out. I'll zoom out so you can kind of see where it is, but it's by Alexandria right here. You can kind of see some of those locations I pointed out, but you can kind of look at this dock, and he was just kind of pitching a drop shot underneath this dock and catching like 20 pounds a day. It's kind of crazy. He just stayed there all week. So that's one last spot. So that's it for Potomac. Let's see here. Gabe saying sounds good and original with the Elite Series wrap-up, so I'm glad that you guys are liking that. And then Birdsong says we need to head out to Conway. We definitely do. Or head out to the river for sure. I'm going to be probably back in Little Rock for a while during the summer, potentially. I'm not really sure yet. I haven't really figured that out. But maybe we can try to meet up and go fishing on Beaver Fork or the river or something like that. So let me get a drink of water real quick, guys, and then we'll get to Lake Tuscaloosa. Hey, what's up, Sam? So, Sam, who are my old fishing partners on, we fished the college circuit together. We actually won the Southern Conference college fishing qualifier on Lake Dardanelle together. That was a fun tournament. We caught like 19 pounds, and we were sharing one spot with one of our buddies, and he couldn't catch anything, and we caught them all. So he kind of came in on our spot, so it was kind of, you call it worked out the way we think it should have, but we still kind of put a beat down on the field. We won by like 5 pounds. So that was kind of fun. But Todd Lee says, what night or time are you planning on doing the Elite FLW recap? I'll probably just be posting it, just a normal video, and I'll try to post them on like Monday or Tuesday is kind of the goal, probably, or maybe Wednesday. I'm not really sure yet. I have to figure out how long it's going to take me to edit them, but I'm just going to post them as a normal video on YouTube, not a live stream. Then Slade, he asked me, have you ever fished Tim's Ford Lake? I have not. He's asking for some tips. If you want to have me look at the lake, I know you have a tournament coming up there pretty soon, but if you just send me an email at fishthemoment1@gmail.com, tell me the lake name, the state, the county, water clarity, water temp, and make sure it has a Navionics map. I can try to take a look at it. I'm in college right now and get my MBA, and so I don't have a lot of time to actually go through all my emails and respond individually. I would love to, and I'm trying to do as much as I can. I know some of you guys might be getting some responses from me on Instagram and places like that when I have time. So if I'm not getting back to your emails and stuff like that, I apologize. I'm just swamped right now with all the work I'm doing for the MBA. But anyways, let's get back to the action here, and let's get to Lake Tuscaloosa. Okay, so Lake Tuscaloosa. This is a lake in Alabama, and it looks like an amazing fishery. All these Alabama lakes are really good, and I think that this lake is known for having some big fish in it. I don't know if it's the easiest lake to fish, but probably gets a lot of pressure just because it's right in Tuscaloosa. But basically, looks like it has a lot of clear water on the lower end, and then it has a lot of dirty water on the upper end, and you can see it's really muddy on the upper end. And so what I'm going to try to do is kind of break down this lake in terms of fishing the lower end, the middle end of the lake, and the upper end. And I'm going to cover all three pretty quick here using Google Earth, and then we'll switch over to Navionics. So first up, let's see here on the lower end of the lake. You can see on the lower end of Lake Tuscaloosa, we have some nice sharp points, we have some docks, we have some areas that kind of look a lot like Lake Murray in South Carolina. And just looking at some of these areas, probably going to have to check it out on Navionics to see what areas have good creek channels swinging in on them. But just from visually, this point looks really good here. You might be able to catch them on a jerkbait off this point. There's a nice point right here that looks really nice, both these points here, and then there's some really nice chunk rock down these banks I saw earlier, and this could be a really good bank to throw like an Alabama rig or a jig down. And so I don't think I can tell too much about the lower end just by looking at Google Earth, so I'm going to skip it for now and come back to it with Navionics. Next part of the lake is the middle portion of the lake. This part of the lake is a little bit muddier. As you can see here, the water's pretty clear on this bottom end down here. The water's kind of clear, and as we move up the lake, it gets muddier around this bend in the river or the lake. And actually, one of my favorite looking creeks on this lake is actually these two creeks right in here. These two creeks are north facing. That means they're going to be protected from a north wind, which is great for the spawn. They have a ton of boat docks in them, and they also have these nice islands in them, which I like a lot, because what I think is going to happen is these fish are going to actually start staging on the points of this area. So this point here, and this point right here, and they're going to start staging to spawn back behind this island, back in these pockets here, and back along these docks. And so again, we'll take a look at Navionics in a second here to see what this creek looks like underwater, but looks really solid to me. And then the last part of this lake is the upper end of this lake, and as you can see, it looks super muddy and might not be the most appealing area for the winter time, but fortunately for the guys in Alabama, the water or the air temperatures are going to be going up pretty quickly here in the next 2 weeks, getting up to the 65 to 70 degree range in the next week here. And so because of that, it looks like there's going to be some fish moving up to spawn, and there might be some potential for fish moving up in the next couple weeks to some pre-spawn areas. And so because of that, I'm actually going to try to look at some shallow water spawning areas up on the top end of the lake, because a lot of times on these deep clear reservoirs you can catch some really big fish during the spawn away from the bottom of the lake. So you leave the bottom of the lake, leave the middle end of the lake, and actually come to the very top portion of the lake where it gets narrow, where it gets muddy and shallow. And some of the biggest bags I've caught in the spring have been on the upper portions of these deep, clear lakes. One lake that comes to mind in particular is Lake DeGray in Arkansas. It's a notoriously difficult lake, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, and I normally catch some really big fish way up the lake, running out basically where the river narrows down, kind of like this portion of Lake Tuscaloosa. But one thing I really liked about Lake Tuscaloosa is this this little portion of the lake here. This area has a lot of vegetation in it, and in the springtime, especially when the water temperatures get between 55 and 60 degrees, big largemouth love to spawn in dying lily pad stems and up in shallow water willow and bank grass. And if we look back in this creek back in here, you can actually see that there's some really nice lily pads and some bank grass that's growing back in this creek. So this is the type of area right here. You can see there's a little ditch that runs back in here, and this looks like the lake's down in this picture. If we take it back a little bit, it looks like the lake gets a little bit deeper, or it normally is a little bit deeper. It gets the full pool, but this is an area. This is obviously image when the lake is down, and if you look, there's some really nice lily pads in here. And what I would do is I would kind of try to just kind of sit on the outside edge of these lily pads, because I think this creek probably swings out from the back of this little pocket and runs right around the edge of these lily pads. And I would sit right here on the edge of these lily pads and fish a pure poison blade swim jig. Basically, I would swim a jig. I'd fish a half-ounce spinner bait, or maybe even flip these lily pads. And this could be a great staging area and a spawning area for some big largemouth. Another area that looks really good is this bank right down here. As you can see, there's some really nice shallow water bank grass, which you don't see on the bottom end of the lake, but looks like there's some really good spawning cover on the top end of this lake, especially in this creek. Another area that looks really good is actually back up in this creek, and again, just some scattered lily pads and some scattered vegetation. So these are some really good looking areas here on Lake Tuscaloosa, and they're definitely areas I would check out if I was fishing here in the pre-spawn and the early spawn. So let's get back to Navionics real quick, and that's all pretty much I saw on Google Earth. So I want to get over to Navionics because there's some pretty good contour lines on this lake. Okay, let's grab some comments here real quick. There weren't too many coming in. Kind of a slow night. I only gave you guys like a 1-day notice on this live stream. Sorry about that. I've been really busy this week. Haven't had a chance to kind of get my feet under me until yesterday. But let's see here. Slates, thanks for the feedback, along with Rod Royal and James Alafoy. Good stuff. Thanks. Awesome. So glad y'all are enjoying the live stream. Hopefully I don't drop too many people. We're getting down to 26. We're up at like 45, which is good for a little bit, but hopefully I'm not boring everyone too much with all this information. But let's take a look here at the bottom end of Lake Tuscaloosa here. So a couple areas that kind of stuck out right away, what we talked about was this point right here. If you look right here, there's a nice steep point, and this creek channel, this blue line, runs right up against this point and actually cuts back into a little pocket here. And this point right here, let me switch over to Navionics so you can see it a little bit easier, but this point right here is really sharp and really steep, and this is a great spot for fish to pull up in the late wintertime and the early pre-spawn, and you can catch them on suspending jerk baits, you can catch them on Alabama rigs, things like that. Another good looking area back through here, let me switch back over to this. Around the corner we were looking at is this little pocket right here, and as you can see, there's again a nice little creek channel that runs in, and you have some nice sharp points leading into the back of this creek. And again, these look like really good points to fish the Alabama rig, to fish a suspending jerkbait. So two really good looking spots here. Another spot that I saw a second ago that looked really good was this creek right here. And the reason I like it so much is that unlike these other little pockets up and down the lake here, this creek has a really defined creek channel that feeds it. So if you look right here, the creek channel swings around, and then one arm goes this way and the other arm swings back into this creek. So it swings like this and it cuts back in here. And this is really the only pocket on the lower end of the lake that has this nice defined channel that cuts off from the main river channel. And so I would think that this point right here and this whole pocket really would just be a great place to fish a spinning jerkbait, maybe this flat side crankbait as well in like a crawdad color. I think that'd be a really good little pocket, especially because the lake is super clear. The fish are going to be in a little bit deeper water, and so you can probably find them on these steeper banks a little bit easier than you can on the flatter banks like in these pockets here. You can see the contour lines are more spread out. It's kind of a shallower bank, and that's not really what you want to look for on deep clear lakes in the late winter and the early spring. So moving back up here, let's look at those couple creeks I was calling out earlier. I'm going to try to find them here. Here we go. So these twin creeks that stick out just off this like bend of the river channel. And the reason I really like these creeks, again, like I said, they're north facing, so they're going to be protected from any north wind that blows into this lake. And another thing I like about them is if you look, there's a nice creek channel that runs right across the mouth of these two pockets. So right here, there's a pocket that cuts off here and a pocket that cuts off here, and that creek channel swings right across the mouth of him. And a couple really good looking spots right away in the mouth of this pocket would be this point. That creek channel actually pulls right up against the tip of this point, and that could be a great spot to fish a football jig or jerkbait. Another spot that looks really good is this little creek channel swing where the swings across this point and then it gets a little bit shallower back in here. Another great looking spot. So I would fish that with the Alabama rig with the jerkbait, things like that. Another great spot is this little point off this island. Remember we saw this island and I said that the fish might pull back in here to spawn, and they're probably going to stage on this point. And the reason I like it so much is because the main creek channel runs right here, and then the secondary creek channel runs right across it in this direction. And so it's kind of at the intersection between a main river channel and a secondary creek channel. And this is not only going to be a good spot in the pre-spawn, but a really good spot in the summertime when the fish start moving off of the beds and getting back on their main like ledge spots. So this is a good looking area right here. And I don't know, this whole creek just looks really good. There's a lot of nice points. You can see there's a lot of nice secondary points back in here. Here's a couple really good secondary points that I'm loving right here as well. So I would fish all of these secondary points, which a secondary point, just to explain it again, is any points that are actually back in a creek. So like right here, this would be a main lake point. This point right here is a main lake point, and so is this one. But any points that are back in a creek, like this point right here, that's a secondary point. That's just what we call them. I don't really know why, but that's why they call them that. I don't know why they call them that, but that's what they call them. So here's a secondary point and another one. So I would hit all these secondary points with a jerkbait and flat side crankbait, especially because this water is getting a little bit dirtier. That flat side crankbait is going to be on fire if the water clarity is between 2 to 3 feet. Last but not least, coming up here we have this shallow creek area, and so one thing I want to check out whenever I'm looking at these shallow water areas, I don't really want to look too much for contour lines. It doesn't make that much of a difference when you're fishing up shallow, but I do want to make sure that there's enough water back here to hold some fish. And as you can see back in this creek, we have 10 foot of water. There's a 10-foot contour line right here, and that's plenty of water to hold fish throughout the pre-spawn and all the way throughout the summer even. So there's plenty of deep water back in here to hold fish, and so those lily pads were right in here actually, and it just looks like a great spot to find some pre-spawn bass. Same thing in here. Again, right in here we have 10 foot of water, 10-foot contour lines, and here's where all those lily pads were. We're right back in here, and there's actually a nice little creek channel swing against this point. If you look, the contour lines get really close together right here, so that point could be really good for a jig or a crankbait, especially if there's any hard bottom or rock down there, or like a lay down tree or something like that. So that's basically it for Lake Tuscaloosa. It's a pretty diverse fishery, and but it's, you know, it only has a few different types of cover, and so I think I covered the lower end, the middle end, and the upper end pretty quick, but I think that between those 3 different areas of the lake and those different techniques I explained, you're definitely going to be able to figure out how to catch fish during the pre-spawn all the way through the spawn. Let's see here. We're saying one of the guys, Bethlehem Lacrosse, said that that dock on the Potomac has a warm water discharge. That's very interesting. I didn't know that actually. So that's definitely going to be a good spot in the wintertime if there's warm water pouring out of there. So not getting a lot of comments, not getting a lot of talking going on tonight in the stream. I don't know if my energy level's low or if you guys are just tired from the work week, but keep shooting out questions. I love to answer questions between lakes and things like that. And I'm actually planning on doing about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A at the end of this stream. So just be shooting out questions. If you have any questions about lures, anything about like my favorite lure, my favorite fishing technique, anything like that, any questions you want to throw at me, well, within reason. Don't throw out anything like super personal, but anything about fishing, I'll be sure to answer. So throw out some questions for me for sure, and I want to get to answering those, and it'll also help me when I am getting to the Q&A section, so I have kind of a backlog of questions to work through while you think of some more. So let's get to the last lake here real quick. Okay. So last lake here is Smith Mountain Lake, and Smith Mountain Lake is in Virginia. Again, another really renowned fishery. The Bassmaster Elite Series fished here multiple times. I think there's smallmouth and largemouth in this lake, and the water temps in Virginia right now, or the air temperatures, I mean, in Virginia are between 50 and 60 degrees. So the waters should be warming up. These fish should be moving up to their pre-spawn locations. And so I'm going to kind of pick out some areas that are really good pre-spawn areas where these fish are going to be staging to move up to their spawning spots. And on this lake, there's a lot of different water. There's kind of like on Lake Murray, there's some deep clear water docks on the lake. There's a lot of chunk rock. There's deep offshore ridges, all kinds of stuff. But one thing I actually did before I turned the stream is I actually just looked up Smith Mountain Lake fishing, bass fishing, and I watched this video of this guy crushing like 25 pounds of fish on an Alabama rig. And he was fishing down these steep rocky banks, and it reminded me a lot of a pattern I use on Lake Hamilton in Arkansas. And so I'm actually going to kind of look at this lake kind of like it would be Lake Hamilton in Arkansas, and kind of show you spots that are similar to what I like to fish there, and hopefully that will translate in some good spots on Smith Mountain, and you guys are going to be able to find some good fish. So first off, when I was trying to figure out which part of the lake I wanted to fish, I immediately crossed off this lower end of the lake that had super clear water. If you look here, this water is nice and blue and dark. That means it's clear. And I don't know, I'm just not a big fan of fishing super clear water. I'm never really that comfortable fishing it unless I have like standing timber or grass. So because there's not very much standing timber or grass here on Smith Mountain, or at least not to my knowledge, I'm going to kind of stay away from this deep clear end of the lake, and I'm going to make my way back into some of these creeks. And I'm actually going to try to head about halfway back in some of these major creeks, because normally the water is going to be a little bit dirtier in there, and I can catch fish on reaction baits a little bit easier, like a flat-side crankbait, a jerkbait, or an Alabama rig. And so first area of the lake I'm going to look at is this kind of this Union Hill or Union Hall area, I guess. I don't know what it's actually called, but this little part of the creek. And if you look at it, we have clear water over here, and then the water gets dirtier back in this creek. And I don't know, I just really like this area. It has some nice creek channel swings. It has nice docks, some chunk rock, all kinds of stuff. So first spot that I really liked, just pulling back in here, was this bank right here. The reason I like it actually is kind of weird, but if you look at all the other banks around this entire lake, they all have boat docks on them. Every single one of them has boat docks everywhere. And this is the first bank back in this creek that doesn't have any boat docks. This whole bank has no boat docks on it. And I just thought that was very unique for this part of the lake. There's also an area right in here, it's kind of the same way. No boat docks around this whole swing, but this is a really long stretch without boat docks. And normally, I don't know if that makes that much of a difference. I don't think it really affects the fish if there's boat docks there or not. But just because it's different and there aren't the boat docks, I think that it makes it a spot worth checking out. I've always found that whenever I'm fishing in an area that has tons of targets, like lots of stumps or lily pads or grass, and there's just grass or lily pads everywhere, I seem to catch the fish. I sometimes find the best fishing on areas where there's no lily pads or where there's no stumps, where it's just clean mud bank. And normally, when you get that situation, you'll find areas that have like one rock or maybe one isolated stump. And because there's just one piece of cover for those fish to get on, all the fish on that bank congregate in that one little area. And so, same thing's going to happen here on this bank that doesn't have any docks on it. What's going to happen is that right here on this point, or maybe on this point, there might be a bigger boulder or a bigger rock that sticks out, and because there's no docks for these fish to get on, they might congregate on these points or on these boulders a little bit better, and you might be able to catch 3, 4, or 5 fish on one little area down this bank. So we'll look at it on Navionics in a second to see if it looks good from an underwater perspective, but that's just the first spot I called out. Here's another one of those same stretches, a really long stretch actually without any boat docks, and this stretch looks like it has a lot of laydowns on it, which looks awesome. And there's actually some good chunk rock down it as well. And this looks like a great spot to fish a crankbait, maybe flip a jig down this bank, or throw an Alabama rig. So I really like this bank as well. Another spot that I like was around the corner here, and it was this this like marina area. If you look in here, you can actually kind of see that this creek kind of makes a big turn. It turns back up north, and whenever I get a creek that runs like this, where it runs back up north from south to north, the pockets right on that turn always seem to be really good, especially on Lake Hamilton and Lake DeGray. And so what I like to do is I kind of like to just fish around these pockets on the outside bend of a river when it runs from south back up to the north. And there's not maybe a scientific reason for that, but it just always seems to be a really strong area of any lake, in my opinion. And so what I would do is I would come in here and I would fish all these boat docks. I would fish them with a jig. You can actually see there's some really, really good chunk rock down this bank. I'm going to try zooming really close for you guys. But there's some really chunky rock down this bank, and that looks like a great spot to fish a little squarebill or a flatside crankbait. There's also more riprap down this bank here. And this whole area is just kind of covered in riprap and rock. And when the water temperatures start to warm up to the 50-55 degree range, these fish are going to pull up on these shallow riprap banks, and you can catch them really well on that flatside crankbait and on a squarebill. Another thing I like about this area is that there's some really big docks all throughout here. There's like this big dock right here, another couple big docks, and if you look around the rest of the part of the lake, a lot of the docks you're seeing are small. It's like this pocket here has a bunch of small little docks. There's all these small little docks through here. There's not really a lot of big docks, and so a lot of times these fish on these type of lakes, they like to congregate on one or two particular docks, and so you'll fish 15 or 20 docks in a row, and you might only catch fish on one or two of them. And these bigger docks always seem to hold more fish when, I guess, a percentage of the docks I fish. So if I fish 15 docks, I'm more likely to catch multiple fish off of a big dock as opposed to a small dock. So there are some few little things I picked up over the years that maybe are helpful. I don't know if those are like scientific or if it's super scientific there, but definitely things I've learned over the years that have helped me kind of pattern fish on new lakes when I don't know what the fish are doing. A couple other areas I picked out here on Smith Mountain. If you look at the lake here, I'm going up the west arm, and one of these areas is there's an actual really nice patch of chunk rock down one of these banks, and this is a type of area that actually is has some natural chunk rock on it. And as you can look here, the water right here is nice, or the bank here is nice and clean. There's no rock. It's pretty muddy, kind of sandy, and it's also kind of sandy on this side. But right on here, there's some really nice chunk rock, and it looks like it's natural rock. It's not man-made riprap, and this looks like a great spot to catch them on a squarebill crankbait and a jig in the pre-spawn. And I found another area like this actually down the lake a little bit, and it's, let me try to zoom out here. It's up on the east fork of this lake, and I'll zoom in kind of slow for anyone who fishes Smith Mountain, but it's right off this point. And there's, again, some really nice natural chunk rock down this bank. It's not man-made, it's actual natural chunk rock. It looks like there might be some riprap that was man-made here, but then it extends out with natural chunk rock, and that's another dynamite looking area for a squarebill crankbait or a jig here on Smith Mountain Lake. So those are a couple areas I picked out, and I think that those are definitely some areas that are going to hold fish in the pre-spawn and maybe hold fish throughout the spawn as well. A lot of fish do like to spawn around riprap, and so you can catch them on a shaky head and a jig fishing down riprap in the spring when they start to spawn. So good areas to check out. Okay, so next I'm going to switch back over to Navionics here. So let's get over to the Navionics web app. Okay, Smith Mountain Lake again. So here's that creek that I was showing you guys. So here's all of Smith Mountain Lake. Here's a clear water section. And then here's that area that I was checking out. And I just wanted to kind of go through this creek here and show you guys some areas using Navionics that I think look good and why I think they're good. So the first is that bank that I said had no docks on it, and here's the reason why I liked it. Basically, if you look here, you can see that there's no fixed docks down this whole bank, and there's actually a really nice creek channel that runs right across the whole width of this bank. So this makes it into a bluff wall. A bluff wall is any place where the shore goes from really shallow water, like 2 to 3 feet, to really deep water, 30 to 40 feet, in, let's say, a cast from the bank. So you're going to have really sharp drop, like a steep wall, down this whole bank. And this is a great spot to catch fish on Alabama rigs and on jerkbaits in the wintertime and in the pre-spawn. And these fish will set up on these really steep rocky banks, and they'll set up kind of on all these points. So right in here, on this point, off this secondary point, and off this point right here. And they'll actually stage here in the wintertime and then kind of slowly migrate down these banks into these pockets to spawn. And they might set up on these docks or on the inside mouth of this pocket. And so what I would normally do if I'm coming to Smith Mountain Lake in the pre-spawn is I would fish this bank right here with an Alabama rig and with a jig really slow down that bluff wall. And if I'm not getting bit, I would work my way a little bit shallower around this point and fish down these boat docks or down some of these steeper banks. And I think that that's just going to be a really good area on Smith Mountain Lake. Another good looking area here is, again, that steep bank without any docks I talked about on where we saw those laydowns. And one part of this bank looks actually really good. It's where this creek channel runs right up against the bank here. If you look at Navionics, just normal Navionics, you can see that this creek, maybe go back to sonar. Sonar looks a little bit better, but you can see this creek channel runs in here, and then it swings down around this corner, and that creek channel hugs right up against the bank, right against this point. And so as you can see, the contour lines are really sharp together, meaning it's a sharp drop, and then they start to narrow out down this bank, or spread out down this bank, meaning the water is shallower down this bank and deeper down this stretch. And so these fish are going to sit up right on this transition where it goes from shallower water to deep water in the pre-spawn, and they want to get on these transition areas where it goes from shallow to deep water. And so what I would do is I would work down this whole bank, starting about here with an Alabama rig and with a jerkbait, and work my way all the way down this bank into this pocket. And I would, if I catch fish, I would kind of just continue down this whole bank and this whole area. And if I don't get bit on this little stretch, I would try to duplicate an area that looks just like this further back in the creek. For example, let's say this spot right here. So here's another spot that looks very similar, where that creek channel swings in right up against the bank here, and it creates this channel swing where you have shallow water moving into the pocket here, and you have a nice sharp steep bank right on this point here, and right where that creek channel swings in. So I would fish from this deeper, steeper part of the bank around the corner back into this pocket and fishing an Alabama rig jerkbait. And I would fish the Alabama rig and stuff actually down the side of these docks. I would cast the Alabama rig down both sides of the docks, maybe actually into the boat slip, and also down the front of these docks. And I would count down 10 to 15 feet and then just work it really slow down in front of these docks. And a lot of times these fish will suspend underneath these docks and stage to move up into the back of these creeks. So that's pretty much it for the stream tonight. Looks like we're getting a lot of people dropping out. I asked for a bunch of questions. I don't know if I only got 2 or 3 questions. I got 1 question actually from Clifford. Appreciate that. So looks like might just be a slow night. Maybe I didn't give enough notice on the stream. But if you guys have any questions, I'm definitely down to do like 30 minutes of Q&A. I kind of plan to do 30 minutes of Q&A here at the end, but it looks like we don't have very many questions. So if you guys have questions, definitely be shooting them in the live chat here. But I'll answer Clifford's while you guys are trying to think of those. Clifford asks, fluoro or mono fishing line in the winter? And so basically, the way I choose my line in the winter between monofilament and fluorocarbon is the type of bait I'm fishing. So if I'm fishing a jig or a bait that I'm going to be fishing on the bottom, like flipping a tube or fishing a like wobble head or anything like that, I'm going to be fishing fluorocarbon line. And especially with a football jig, I'm going to be fishing 15 or 16 pound fluorocarbon line. And the reason I fish fluorocarbon as opposed to monofilament on my jigs and my bottom baits is because fluorocarbon is invisible to the fish and it won't spook them if you're fishing in clear water, or if your bait's down there super deep, they won't notice that line. I also fish fluorocarbon on my flat side crankbaits and my lipless crankbaits. And the reason I do that is because these lipless or these flat side crankbaits normally dive anywhere from 5 to 6 feet deep, and that's on like 12 pound test monofilament. But if I fish this bait on 10 pound test fluorocarbon actually sinks, and it's a little bit heavier than monofilament, and so I can get this bait down from like a 5 to 6 foot range all the way down to 8 to 10 feet of water just by going to 10 pound fluorocarbon as opposed to 12 pound monofilament. And again, monofilament, the difference between monofilament and fluorocarbon is monofilament floats and it's a little bit stretchier, it has some stretch to it. Fluorocarbon has very little stretch and it actually sinks. So just different from different applications. Fluorocarbon is also invisible to the fish. The only baits I actually throw monofilament on are actually a 3/4 ounce lipless crankbait. So like this lipless crankbait here, I'll throw that on 17 pound monofilament line. And the reason for that is because I want to throw this 3/4 ounce red-eye shad because it has a big profile, but I don't want to throw it on like 12 pound fluorocarbon because it'll sink too fast and it'll get too deep in the water. And normally when I'm fishing this bait, I'll fish it up in 4 to 5 feet of water, and if I fish it on 12 pound fluorocarbon, it's always digging the bottom and getting hung. But if I fish it on with 15 pound monofilament, I'll actually be able to keep it up a little bit higher off the bottom because the monofilament floats. And also with that 15 pound or that 17 pound monofilament, I can really horse the fish back to the boat because the line has a lot of stretch, and I don't have to worry about pulling the hooks out of the fish's mouth when I'm fishing that big lipless crankbait. Another bait that I like to throw monofilament on is actually a suspending jerkbait. And I always throw monofilament on my suspending jerkbaits. And the reason for that is because, like I said, fluorocarbon sinks and monofilament floats. And if I'm fishing fluorocarbon on my suspending jerkbaits, that line actually weighs down the jerkbait and will cause it to go from a suspending jerkbait to actually a sinking jerkbait. And it'll actually cause it to sink. And 9 times out of 10, I don't want my jerkbait to be sinking. If anything, I want that bait to be perfectly suspending or rising just a little bit, like slowly rising. For whatever reason, fish just don't like that bait when it's sinking. And also, if you have a jerkbait that's sinking, if you let it sit on a pause for 10 to 15 seconds, that bait will actually start sinking all the way to the bottom and it'll get hung. So because of that, I like to throw a monofilament line because it'll cause that bait to actually float, and then to cause it or like to change the way my jerkbait suspend, I'll switch out like the hooks and I'll add extra split rings and stuff like that to make the bait actually suspend. But if I throw it with fluorocarbon, again, that bait's going to sink. If I throw it with monofilament, the bait has a tendency to float, and it'll stay out of the bottom and the cover. So that's really the two applications I use monofilament line for. So hopefully that answered the question. David Weston, he said from Ohio, what's your favorite lures to throw after ice out? So actually a funny story about that. So my first tournament I ever fished after ice out was actually in Wisconsin on the it was like Winneconne, Wisconsin, and I was fishing up the Fox River, and I think it was like mid-April, and the lakes had just thawed out, and it was the first time we could go fishing. And I think the water temperature was like 45 degrees. And during that tournament, my boat captain, I was a co-angler, and my boat driver, he took me 2 hours up this river to this like backwater area, and apparently he found some like warmer water back up in there. It was like 48 degrees, and he was throwing a buzzbait all day. He literally picked up a buzzbait in 48-degree water and threw it all day. And he ended up catching a limited fish. So for whatever reason in Wisconsin, fish will eat buzzbaits in 48-degree water right after ice out. I'm not saying that would be my suggestion. I'm just saying that it's worked in the past. But my favorite baits after ice out, the fish are obviously going to be more active. They've been under ice all winter, and so they're going to want to start feeding up. And one of the baits I had the most success on in Wisconsin in April and early May, right after ice out, was a vibrating swim jig. So like a chatterbait style bait. This is a striking pure poison. And what I would do is I would cast that bladed swim jig out all the way to the end of my cast, and I would let it sink all the way to the bottom. And then what I would do is I would actually just barely turn my reel handle and just keep it as close to the bottom as I could, while keeping that blade vibrating. And for whatever reason, right when the ice thaws off the lake, bass just cannot stand this pure poison. And I'll fish it in 15 to 20 feet of water sometimes off the edge of flats or off the edge of like some main lake grass, and it's a great bait. Another bait that works really well is a lipless crankbait, kind of for the same reason. I'll fish it down there really slow. It has a nice subtle vibration, and it seems to really get those fish going. And last but not least would be a suspending jerkbait. If the water temps are still like 38, 39 degrees, the fish are still going to be pretty lethargic, and so I would fish a suspending jerkbait on like a 10 to 15 second pause. So those are the baits I would throw right after ice out. West Coast Bassin asks, do you fish a drop shot? If so, what bait do you use? I'll fish a drop shot like once every 100 fishing trips probably. But if I am fishing a drop shot, I'll probably stick with either a striking dream shot finesse worm or the half shell, the striking half shell. And the dream shot is just like a 4-inch finesse worm, and I like that when I'm fishing or when I'm trying to imitate a bluegill or a crawfish. And then if I'm fishing areas where the fish are feeding on shad, I'll go to that striking half shell, and that looks a little bit more like a shad, and I'll throw it in like a tequila sunrise or just like a blue shad color. And I don't know, I used to fish a drop shot all the time in Wisconsin when I lived up there for smallmouth and things like that, but I don't know, since I moved down to Arkansas, I threw it a ton when I first started fishing here. I would fish it in junior tournaments out of the back of the boat and just try to put fish in the boat using the drop shot. But when I finally got my boat and I put the drop shot away and picked up like baits like a football jig, a deep diving crankbait, or a frog, I started catching way more 4 to 7 pound caliber bass, and I never caught any fish over 4 pounds in a drop shot in Arkansas. And then the first time I ever threw a 3/4 ounce football head jig offshore, I caught a 6 and a 4, and I pretty much haven't turned back from then. I haven't really put spinning rods in my boat for years because of that, just because I have so much confidence in these jigs and crankbaits and things like that. So, well, looks like we're kind of losing people here, and there's no more questions. So I'm actually going to end the stream here a little bit early. Hopefully next week we'll get more people, and I'll try to give a notice out. I feel like I'm a little bit tired today too. So hopefully I'll be able to bring a little more energy if that's the problem tonight. But either way, if there's something that I can improve on in these streams or that you guys think could make them better, definitely leave a comment in the video when it's posted. I'll be posting this live stream to my channel right afterwards, so leave a comment if you have any suggestions for the stream. So getting a couple other things. Ryan Watkins says, at what point do you personally decide to switch from winter to pre-spawn patterns? So I guess I don't really like think about it as a pre-spawn or a winter pattern, like a switch between them. Really, the only thing that I guess I do differently is I fish a little bit shallower when the fish are in that pre-spawn mode. And so if I'm noticing that the fish are not biting as well on the deeper offshore areas or on those steeper drops, I'll just start working my way back in the creeks and get on the shallower banks, on the shallower cover. And if I start catching fish there, then I'll keep running that pattern. And so normally, for a rule of thumb, I guess, pre-spawn for me is anytime the water temperature warms up from the 40-degree range up into the 50s. So once water temperatures hit 50 degrees, that's when pre-spawn is like in full effect for me. But I don't know, sometimes even in the wintertime, these fish will, even when the water temps are like 45, 48 degrees, the fish will move up from their steep drops up onto the shallower banks, and I would even consider that pre-spawn. So I wouldn't worry about too much about classifying the different times of year. Just start on the steeper banks and work your way shallow, and just pay attention to the type of banks you get bit on, and then try to replicate that same depth and the same type of bank around the lake, and you're going to have a lot more success. So hopefully that answered everything, and hopefully that got everything covered. Oh, West Coast Bassin said, but jigs don't work on muddier bottoms. That is true. The muddy bottoms are going to be a problem for a jig, so if you're fishing a jig or an area that has a lot of muddy water and muddy bottoms on it, try to look for hard cover in that area. So look for a stump or lily pad stems or anything that has a hard target for those fish to pull up on. Even if the bottom around that stump is really muddy, the fish will bite a jig if you pitch it right on top of that stump. And actually, that's a really good way to catch fish in the pre-spawn, is finding isolated big stumps on shallow muddy flats, and those fish will stage up on those stumps, and you can catch a bunch of fish doing that. Thanks again, guys. I'm going to call it a night here, and hope you enjoyed watching the stream, and hope you can catch me next week. I'll be doing another stream on Thursday, so next Thursday, and I'll try to post it with a little more notice this time so everyone can get on. So thanks again for watching. I really appreciate all the support as always, and I'll see you next time.